This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the very niche and kind of geeky details of modern warfare with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to Emmanuel Freudenthal. He's the only journalist to cover the Anglophone conflict in East Cameroon on the ground. So he's the first person to actually embed with the militias fighting there in a conflict that most people have probably never heard about. It's receiving very little attention in the media. Despite this, the conflict is escalating quite rapidly. There are a lot of deaths on both sides. So Emmanuel is going to explain why these English-speaking rebels in Cameroon are fighting the French-speaking state forces. If you want more Popular Front content, including bonus episodes, videos, all sorts, go to patreon.com/popularfront. This episode is sponsored by defensepost.com. First of all, can you explain what is the Ambazonian conflict going on in Cameroon right now?
So the Ambazonian conflict in Cameroon is basically the Anglophone minority for a long time has been asking to have greater autonomy and has felt discriminated against. And things accelerated in last August when the government cracked down on protests and threw hundreds of people in jail and killed a few dozens. That's when a bunch of armed groups came up and started killing security forces. And then the government retaliated and things spiraled out of control. It's
a little bit more than just English-speaking Cameroonians fighting French-speaking Cameroonians, right? There's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, so it's totally... that's something, maybe a misconception a lot of people have, is that it's French-speaking versus English-speaking Cameroonians, but that's really not the situation right now. It's state forces versus an Anglophone minority that is basically reclaiming or claiming independence for two Anglophone, predominantly Anglophone regions. There is some Francophone living in those regions, and just like there's Anglophones living in the Francophone regions. So the history of the Anglophone conflicts dates back to 1916, if you will, when Cameroon was a German colony, and Germany lost Cameroon Cameroon was put as a protectorate by the UN and split between France and the UK. So part of it was administered by the UK via its colony in Nigeria, and part of it was administered by France via Cameroon, the rest of Cameroon really. And so what happened is that part that was administered by French started speaking French, and the part that was administered by the English started speaking English. That said, there's 240 languages today in Cameroon, so it's an extremely diverse country in terms of linguistics. It's probably, I think it's the number 2 after Papua New Guinea or something like that in terms of diversity or number of languages per inhabitant. Basically the likelihood of your neighbor speaking a different language, and most people will speak 4 languages, including the official languages that are French and English. And today Cameroon is a bilingual country because in the 1960s Nigeria and Cameroon, so the French Cameroon, got their independence. And the Anglophone part that was then attached to Nigeria had to choose whether they wanted to join French Cameroon or whether they wanted to join the English-speaking Nigeria. And so part of it went to Nigeria, and what is today the north and southwest region of Cameroon went with Cameroon and remained Anglophone. They joined Cameroon as a federation, meaning that they could keep their language. It became a second official language, and government communication now have to be in the 2 languages. And they also kept their legal system and so on. So the teaching, the education and so on is supposed to be also bilingual. Fast forward to the 80s, or like until the 80s, a lot of the Anglophone felt like the Francophone majority government was trying to impose French on them by changing education curriculum, by sending French teachers, all kinds of things. And so they kind of rebelled against it in the 1980s. And since then, this discontentment has grown. And then fast forward again to 1916, where on 1st of October, which was a birthday or the anniversary of the reunification of the two Cameroon, there were protests in the Anglophone Cameroon. And those protests were mostly led by the teachers and the lawyers. The teachers, because they felt like you had teachers, Francophone teachers, coming and teaching in bad English or even teaching in French. And the lawyers, because for similar reasons, judges, we didn't understand common law and didn't speak English very well, would come and then force people to speak French in the court and so on. So they felt like they were subjugated. Overall, the population also felt that, because a lot of the administration, a lot of the officials and the armies that were in Anglophone Cameroon were from France, but also because it's symbolic of a state that is an authoritarian state. And that language obviously was different to theirs. On top of that, there's issues of neglect and lack of development, when a lot of Anglophones feel like they're contributing a lot of income to the state through oil and timber and so on, and not really seeing much development in terms of roads, hospitals and schools and things like that. So there was a lot of discontent, and that discontent kept rising. At that time, there was also the government during those protests, arrested a bunch of people. I think it's 20 people were killed, something like that.
And that was in the 80s still, right?
No, so that's in 2016. So that's 2 years ago.
Oh, so this is recently now. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I fast forwarded, but maybe that was a bit too fast. So yeah, no, that was in 2016. And so, and there were like images of, I think that was in the 2016 protest, where there were images of army forcing students to roll in the mud. It's just to humiliate them, basically, roughing up lawyers and so on.
Yeah, you got like the powerful force that they don't even relate to anyway, coming into their areas and completely humiliating them, right? I mean, I imagine that kind of kick-started a lot of this recent conflict.
Yeah, exactly. And so when things really got started was in 2017, October 2017. So same thing, the anniversary of the reunification or the federation of Anglophone and Francophone Cameroon. And at that time, the government arrested hundreds of people. I mean, they just go and just arrest all the young men, basically. And also killed a whole bunch of people. I can't remember the numbers, but like several dozens. And a lot of there were rumors that there were a lot more people killed than those that were accounted for. And so then I think this radicalized most of the Francophone population. They saw like, okay, this state is not respecting us, and when we protest, we get killed and arrested arbitrarily. And so armed groups were formed by what had been like a kind of fringe part of that movement, the most extreme, if you want, part. And that became mainstream. So a whole bunch of armed groups started. The political organizations that were asking for secession or independence kind of grew stronger. And now there's about half a dozen armed groups operating in Anglophone Cameroon. And meanwhile, the state also ramped up and burnt at least 20 villages, according to a Human Rights Watch report, and also killed, dozens of people. I mean, I've interviewed refugees, and the story, and displaced people, and the story is always like the army came, they, either shot in the air or we ran before they did anything. And then they killed like young men from 12 to 50 years old.
Let's talk about that, because you're pretty much the only Western journalist, at least, who's managed to embed with these militant Anglophone speaking groups in Cameroon. What was that like?
So there's been no other journalist so far, Western or not. There's one other journalist who's managed to go in the Anglophone area, but it's very hard to access because the government doesn't allow any journalist access to the area, officially. And so the only way to go there is either to embed with the army, and they're not necessarily very open, or to embed with the armed group. So that's what I did. And the way it was like is, what was the main thing I learned there is this main thing that surprised me was that group was actually composed mostly of former farmers, or people who had some education but definitely weren't soldiers. So that group was called the Ambazonia Defense Forces, and it's probably one of the main groups operating in Anglophone Cameroon.
So Ambazonia is basically the region that the Anglophone Cameroon see as theirs, right?
So that's the name, that's a self-declared name of their country. And this comes from, the Ambaz Bay, which is in that region. And I think it was basically someone came up with that name actually not so long ago. I think it was in the 80s, if I remember correctly. And so they really took it up now for their new country.
What does it mean?
It doesn't mean anything apart from being derived from that bay.
All right. Okay. So like the Ambaz Bay.
Yeah, which is actually kind of interesting in some ways. I hadn't thought about it before, but Cameroon comes from the Portuguese Camaroes, and it was given to that country. Well, the name came for that country when Portuguese ships arrived. I think it was in the 1600s, if I remember correctly, or something like that. And found a lot of shrimps, camarones, in the bay there, and so they called it. So that's where the name Cameroon comes from.
Okay. And what was it like when you were with these groups? I mean, they're doing these attacks quite frequently now, right? They're attacking the military there. They've killed quite a few soldiers, and of course, lost a fair amount of their own. How well organized were they?
So like I was saying, these are former farmers and former people with all kinds of jobs, were not military jobs. So obviously not really effective yet, not as effective as professional armies. They also don't have proper guns. They use hunting rifles. Also some other sections of the Ambazonia Defense Forces that I haven't embedded with, they have machine guns and seem to be a lot more organized militarily. But yeah, most of the people who were there were basically faced with a choice. Most of the people who were there had to leave their village after the army attacked them. That's the majority of them, not all of them. And the army often either burnt the villages or set up a camp there, but most of them fearing to return there. Also, some of them were involved with the secessionist movement, and so they know that, okay, the village administration around the village, or the village chief, knows that if they come back, they'll get arrested. So basically they have a choice. They can either go and be refugees or displaced people in Nigeria or somewhere in the bush in Cameroon, or take up arms and try and get a new country. So it's really driven by wanting the new country, but also just by desperation. They just don't have many other options.
And what is the military or the government's motivation for going in and burning the whole place down, beating up people, shooting people dead? Because I've seen these videos, and you've done a lot of work on this, and it does seem that the government is going in very heavy-handed. Why don't they kind of try and work things out?
Yeah, so the government so far has seen these armed groups as terrorists and not as a group that they could negotiate with. But they've also laid quite a lot of violence on the civilian populations that really had nothing to do with those groups, because they see, I guess, because the military maybe see all the Anglophone population as potential fighters. I'm not really sure what the strategy there is. So far, it seems like this has probably created more of a problem, more fighters fighting against the army. So in terms of why they're taking this strategy, I don't really know. I thought maybe like they thought like extreme violence would mean that these guys just give up, but it hasn't worked.
I think a lot of it as well, I think you get these kind of leaders where they want to be the strong man, you know, and it's like, right, you want to rebel, we'll go in and we'll just shut it down straight away, you know what I mean? They try and come in very heavy-handed, which, like you just said, it has the opposite effect, because a lot of young men will just go, okay, you know, you're going to come and do this, we'll join, you know, a militia and we'll fight back. It seems to be like they're creating their own problem in a way, you know, or at least making it worse.
Yeah, they're definitely making it worse, it seems. They've also burned, for example, motorbikes, and a lot of the young people in town and like smaller or bigger towns, that's pretty much the only job a lot of them have, because there's a massive issue with youth in Cameroon. There's just no employment for them. So then for some reason, they burnt motorbikes, or allegedly burnt motorbikes. And so that meant that from one day to the other, this guy just couldn't contribute to his family's income. And, you know, I mean, you just do that pretty much anywhere. If you piss off young people, you know, they're not gonna just lay down and take it.
Absolutely. There's only so much a person will take before they just say, right, this is enough. I think that gets lost a lot of the time in translation when, you know, reporting on militant groups. It's like these kids didn't start off like this. They weren't born partisans, you know what I mean? It's often, unfortunately, a long series of events that pushes them towards it, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in this case, I think it's just the one event, to be honest. Yeah, like having their village burnt, and maybe having one of their brothers or family members being killed by the army. I don't think it took a lot for them to take up arms. It's just because it just suddenly had no other choice.
And how different is the Anglophone speaking community from the French speaking community?
It depends who you ask, to be honest. There's, like I said, there's 240 languages in Cameroon. So that's as many cultures, songs, villages, like obviously more villages than languages, but so that's one way you could see it. And I don't know if there's a really massive difference in terms of that kind of culture between the Francophones and the Anglophones. I haven't really looked into it. The Anglophones will say that, or at least one of the Anglophone, the leader of the political wing of the Ambazonia Defense Forces, Ayaba Cho, he was telling me that it's not made up, that kind of identity, and it's not colonial. There are actually physical boundaries that define the territory of Ambazonia, and that also might create some culture. This the researcher Achille Mbembe wrote an editorial in Le Monde saying that it's kind of sad in some ways that this struggle gets defined in terms of the colonial force that was occupying whichever part of the country. So these are the two ways of looking at it. Another way also to see why they form a group of Anglophones, I think, is because the state has been majority Francophone, and this in the whole of Cameroon has been a state that has oppressed its people and preyed on people, you know, in terms of resources. Hasn't been a state that has helped people by and large. There's very few roads in the whole of Cameroon. You go in the east, it's the same thing, and just resources are being plundered, and very little actually comes back locally. You get the schools are just pitiful, and the roads, often people have to either build them themselves or just hope that some mining company or some logging company is going to show up and build the roads that will for sure, or clear roads that will fall into disrepair very soon after the companies has left. And so, because the state has been mostly francophone, when you get subjugated, when you get hassled by officials that are speaking the same language as you, you don't see it. You see it as a state, but you don't see it as another culture or as a different people. But when those officials on top of hassling you also speak a different language and purposefully don't speak English, I think that makes you maybe see that. Opposition in a linguistic way.
It creates just another reason for you all to be divided. It's this, and there's just another reason. Aren't there? I think you said before, aren't there elections coming up soon in Cameroon?
Yeah, there's elections coming on the 7th of October, so 6 days after the anniversary of the Federation of Cameroon. And those elections is, I think, 7 candidates, if I remember correctly, including the incumbent president, Paul Biya, who is actually in Geneva right now.
He's been in charge forever, right?
For 36 years, I believe. He's 85 now. He spends quite a lot of time in Geneva. He's actually in Geneva right now. It's most likely as an Intercontinental hotel. It's for 5-star hotel, where he rents entire floors and comes with a whole bunch of people, ministers, helpers, hairdressers for his wife, and so on. We actually calculated how much time he spent abroad in one article we did.
And how much?
Well, since 82, it was 4.5 years on what the local papers or the local government papers call court séjour privé, or short, brief private trips abroad, or brief private trips to Europe. And so those brief private trips, this was sometimes over 100 days in a year. So a third of the year spent on private trips, which sounds a lot like a holiday.
Yeah, it does sound a lot like a holiday. I mean, could you imagine being one of these guys in the Ambazonian areas? Their roads aren't working. The police and the military are coming in and wrecking their villages. Meanwhile, the government is here, there, and everywhere abroad, spending all this money on 5-star hotels. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to realize that is going to cause some problems,
Yeah, I mean, and there was a whole bunch of other issues with the lifestyle of the rulers. I mean, there's been one incident, for example, where the daughter of the president, who was living somewhere in the US, complained on Instagram because a taxi driver had been rude to her and hadn't just believed that she did have the $400 for the ride home. And she thought people would get outraged by the racism, and she was saying oh, but I always take this $400 ride, I do it almost every day. And most Cameroonians were actually less shocked by the supposed racism by the fact that their president's daughter is taking close to the annual average income in rides every few days.
It's that's absolutely disgusting. I mean, no wonder young lads are going right, we'll take up arms. You know what I mean? When the government's daughter is taking kind of taxi journeys that would be their wages. That's insane. So what was it like when you were with these groups? Because I know you went to, not the front line because it's kind of a guerrilla war, but you went on an active operation with these guys. Maybe you can tell me about that.
So the operation was supposed to be on the day I arrived, and then was delayed because they were waiting for bullets to be delivered. And on the last day, they said, "Oh, okay, we're going today." And so I was like, "Okay, I'll follow you." They're like, "Oh, okay." And I asked how far we would be from the front line, and they said, "Oh, about from the place they're gonna attack." And they said about an hour. And when we actually ended up there, we were just 15 minutes walk from the where the army was. And so it was quite a scary night, because I was always thinking like someone's gonna get tipped off, because so many people knew about where we were and could have potentially tipped off the army, or at least a bunch of people knew. And so that didn't happen, luckily. After this stressful night, morning came and people were still loitering about, and I thought, well, why are you not there? And basically what had happened is, on the way they split the ammunitions, and then one of the guys who had quite a chunk of them ended up not making it to the camp, and for a while they were wondering what happened to this guy, did he get lost and so on. And afterwards I was told that actually probably just decided to steal the bullets.
So what did he do with them? What, he went off and sold them?
I'm not in touch with him, so I have no idea where they went. Yeah, but I'm assuming he sold them, or I don't know what you do with like a few hundred bullets.
I mean, it's funny because, like you said, they are kind of disorganized and, whatever. But at the same time, they are causing quite a lot of problems, right, for the government down there. I was reading the other day about the amount of deaths, and it was quite high.
Yeah, so they reckon, the leader reckons they killed about 150 security forces. And there's quite a lot of disruption in terms of the elections. Obviously, they don't want the elections to happen in the Anglophone Cameroon, and the government has recently, the guy was supposed to, the person in charge of organizing the election, said that what they're likely to do is to dislocate some of the election booths into outside this area, which means obviously a lot of people from those areas who would want to vote are not going to be able to vote next to their houses. Another thing that these groups have been accused of doing is forcefully shutting down schools. They did organize boycotts of schools in 2017 as a symbol of the state, as a symbol of these schools are not teaching our kids in English. But human rights groups have accused them of burning schools and targeting principals or teachers who wanted to keep on teaching the kids. And they, at least the Ambazonia Defense Forces, deny that this was the case, and they say that it's just some people we say they're from the separatist armed groups. So at least their hierarchy distances themselves from those action, and who knows who did it. I mean, but according to human rights groups, that was separatists. And the other thing that makes it a bit less funny is, of course, these guys are fighting against a very well-trained army that's getting, support, helicopters, weapons, and so on from the US. Some sections have been trained by ex-militaries from Israel. They also get support from France.
That's because they're fighting Boko Haram as well, right? Near the north.
Yeah, exactly. So they're fighting Boko Haram in the north, and so that's how they get that kind of military support. But even in the north, the military, or even more so, in fact, in the north, the military has been accused of massive human rights violation.
Yeah, there's that awful video, right, where they shoot the toddler and then shoot the women.
Exactly. So they've, and that's not an isolated case. That's cases that have happened in around 2014, 2015, and there's a whole bunch of other cases. These are just the ones that were caught by the army, by the way, by the soldiers themselves, showing off on video. But it's been a modus operandi of these groups, of the army, to kill people for who they accuse of being Boko Haram.
Man, that video is, I mean, I've seen some shit, but that video is, I think, the worst thing I think I've ever seen. It's even worse than ISIS stuff, because it's just a baby, like a baby on the mother's back. It's so bad. And it's like, if they're the kind of soldiers that are going into the Ambazonian areas, it's no wonder that, the place is getting burnt down and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that video was very bad, and there's a bunch of other videos. I mean, this one is especially bad if you understand the French. They say, "Oh, sorry, little girl, we have to do this. Wear this on your head," and so on. It's very kind of, it does look like they actually really don't care about what they're doing. They're doing it. It does look like it's totally a routine for them to go and kill.
Yeah, it's like they're having a laugh. Like the way they approach it, it's not even like, look, we're tough guys. We're gonna kill a kid and a mother. Like they're not even showing off. They're just it just looks like they're just doing it. It's so bad, man. It really bad video.
And there's a bunch of there's some other videos that have come up since this one, and there's a bunch of other ones as well, and there's some others that are going to come out as well, that we got and are looking into.
It was great work trying to find these people.
Yeah, well, the last video, actually this one, the government first denied that this was in Cameroon, and a bunch of people on Facebook were saying that it's in Mali, which is kind of funny when you're from Cameroon or where you've been in Cameroon, you can hear the accent of these guys and you know it's a Cameroonian accent. And so the government was dismissing this as being probably from Mali or from some other country, and saying that this can't be soldiers for a bunch of reasons that really don't stand up much to scrutiny. And after saying that this was fake news, they recently arrested 7 people linked to this video, including several people whose names had been circulated online as being the authors of those killings. So the government kind of backtracked on their initial claims.
And with a lot of conflicts in Africa, they spill out of the countries they're in quite a lot, and cause trouble elsewhere. For example, Congo is a particularly bad place for that happening. Do you think that's the sort of thing that could happen here in Cameroon? Do you think this Anglophone conflict could pull in other countries?
It's hard to know. This is what happened. One thing happened, which was that a bunch of Anglophone leaders were meeting in Nigeria and then got arrested and were then extradited illegally. A lot of people, analysts say that was an illegal move to Cameroon, and then were held for, I think, 3 months or close to that, without access to lawyers, without access to the families. A lot of people, including me, thought they were dead. Apparently they're not dead, but they're still in prison, not being charged, and so on. So that's the main kind of cross-border thing that has happened so far. I can't see this specific conflict, spilling into Nigeria. I don't really see it happen.
Weapons, perhaps, though. No, they could maybe be getting weapons from there or something.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this seems like the most likely place they would be getting weapons from.
Is there anything else you want to say about this conflict and Cameroon in general that you think people should know?
Well, I think overall this is a conflict that is going to last for a long time, because the Ambazonians, or the separatists, are not going to be able to win against government forces that have much better guns and external support. On the other hand, the state forces are unlikely to win, because these guys know the area really well, and they'll always be able to hide in some forest or valleys and so on. And so it's the geography of that whole region is pretty much perfect for guerrilla warfare.
The terrain, it's like jungles and stuff, right?
Yeah, so the southern part is rainforest and thick rainforest, where a lot of the time you can't see more than 10 meters in. Part of it is actually some parts of it are national park, and people will still hunt. The eco guards can't do much because these guys know the area like their pocket, and they can hide very easily. So obviously the army is going to be in the same situation. And the northern part is grasslands with loads of hills and little valleys and cove, and it's very easy to get lost, and it's very easy to hide in there. So I don't think, and they have a very strong support, as much as I could see of the local population.
Yeah, what is the support like?
So the fighters were part of that community basically, because they're all Anglophones, and a lot of them fight in their own area where they used to live. So they are part of that community, and the feeling I've had being with them and being with different communities is people are very welcoming of them. And of course, you show up with a gun and stuff. People are not going to turn you down necessarily. Also, these are like hunting rifles, so people just go hunting. Every grandfather with, has a bit of money probably has a hunting rifle, so it's not like unusual. But people seem to be quite happy when they see them overall. So I do think they have quite a lot of local support, and throughout a lot of the Anglophone people I've known for a long time, even the very mild ones, the kind of almost accountant types that I know are very much in favor of secession and independence. I'm not saying that's everyone, but it does feel like in my circle, at least, it's quite a lot of the people.
They do have popular support, it seems.
Yeah, they do. And so one thing to keep an eye out for is the elections on 7th October. The incumbent President Biya is almost guaranteed to be re-elected. But what is to look out for is, what's going to happen in those regions. And also, are other regions going to take a model on that and think, maybe we should also kick the state out of our region. I don't know how likely that is, though.
That is a good point, though, because that could very easily start to undo the country. Like you said, there is over 100 different languages spoken in Cameroon, which you probably each one has its own culture in some ways. If they see what the Anglophone guys are doing, you're right. People might go, yeah, we don't like how we're being treated either. And before you know it, you got chaos.
Yeah, that is quite possible. I mean, there's a bunch of things that made it happen, I think, in the Anglophone area, including that language thing. So the fact that the state is Francophone and they're mostly Anglophone. And also having very strong elites abroad and a history of contestation, which you don't find in the other regions. That hasn't been the case. Some people argue that Boko Haram is an example of an armed group that has support in Cameroon by people who are seeking to gain more power, but more in a cynical way, where I've understood it. I don't know if that's true, but that's been argued. So that would actually, be a predecessor in some ways. And the other thing to take into account is that, the president is 85 now, and obviously that's quite old, and, he's not going to be around forever. So one question that everyone is asking, what happens when he dies? Who's going to take over? And he's been very effective at making sure that there's no one really sticking out who could be a logical successor to him.
Right. He's made sure no one can kind of get him killed and then take over or have a coup or something.
Yeah. Legally, according to the Constitution, it's the president of the Senate that is supposed to take over the president in case the president dies. The Senate was, I think, planned in the Constitution like several decades ago, if I remember correctly. But the president of Senate the Senate itself has actually been created quite recently. And the president, I think, nominates, is it like half or something like that of the senators, and the other half get voted. So obviously he's got like a massive majority in the Senate, which he would have even if he didn't name everyone. But so he basically gets to pick the president of the Senate, and the guy he picked is basically someone everyone knows. Even if legally speaking he's supposed to be the successor, he's never going to be practically speaking a successor to him. So that guy is just a guy that doesn't have much of a network, and if he does, he'd probably get arrested on corruption charges like a lot of the other people who've kind of stuck out a little bit.
I think the work you've been doing there is really important as well, because there's kind of a bit of an oversaturation with, all these conflicts need covering, but people do tend to flock to the more headline grabbing ones. I think it's great that you've been there and uncovered this. With that in mind, where can people most easily get hold of the work you've done there with the Anglophone conflict?
Yeah, thanks. You can read my 2 articles on IRIN, the website, which is irinnews.org, IRRNnews.org. Or you can also follow me on Twitter, Emmanuel Freudenthal. If you look me up, I think I'm pretty much the only guy with that name around.
Spell that, mate. Spell that.
So I know everyone's going to get it wrong because it always happens to me when I have to spell my name for a card or something. But it's Freudenthal. And basically, I think if you type it like close enough in Emmanuel, you should be able to find me.
Thank you very much, mate. That was excellent.
Thank you.
So that was Emmanuel talking about the conflict in East Cameroon between the Anglophone speaking Ambazonians and the French speaking state forces. This episode was sponsored by defensepost.com. There's an interview I did with them up on their website right now as well. Check that out if you want. It's mostly about Popular Front. This episode is also sponsored by Achtung Cthulhu Tactics, which is a video game coming out. And it's based on this story they've created where the Nazis in World War II had this split and they're fighting each other and they're using occult magic and all of this weird Cthulhu, H.P. Lovecraft kind of stuff. I thought it looked cool. So I thought, yeah, you guys can sponsor an episode of the podcast. So check those guys out. They're also doing a podcast about the whole thing, which is aurocdigital.com/podcast. That is AUROCHDIGITAL.com/podcast. And if people do want to sponsor an episode, get in contact at popularfrontpodcast@gmail.com. The rule is, if I think it looks good, if I like the look of it, and I think that listeners would maybe like the look of it, then cool, you can sponsor podcasts, no problem. As usual, for all bonus content, go to patreon.com/popularfront. Like I always say, for the price of literally one shit coffee a month, you can get bonus episodes, all sorts of different content. There's narrated Popular Front articles. You can also get involved with the collaboration process in terms of what I'm going to be doing in the future with videos. And also, if you sign up for the highest tier, you get free merchandise when it comes through. I just sent off the first batch of Popular Front stickers to all of those lot. So yeah, if you want to support Popular Front, go to patreon.com/popularfront. And thank you very much to all the highest tier backers. That is Ryan Sandercock, Stephen Ardy Henderson, Cole Gannon, Joel Tambusi, LH, Digital, Zachary Hinch, Aliame Leroy, Daniel Shearer, Joanne Stocker, Margaret Bowling, and Teddy. There are a lot of people now seem to be getting involved on the Patreon, which I'm really thankful for, so thanks very much. Having these backers on Patreon has allowed us to put some money into making the first Popular Front documentary, which has basically been filmed now and is waiting to be edited. It's about the Irish Republican youth in the Bogside in Derry in Northern Ireland. The access we got was very good, and no doubt it will be quite controversial when it comes out. Anyway, if you want to watch that documentary when it comes out, go to youtube.com/popularfront. Please subscribe, and you also apparently have to hit the notification bell because YouTube is just this hellish platform that never works properly otherwise. So please do that. For all things Popular Front, follow us on Twitter at popularfrontco, or follow my Twitter, that's Jake_Hanrahan, HANRAHAN. We have an Instagram account as well, apparently, that is at popular.front. Some people have been saying I should start a Facebook page so people can like it on Facebook. No, we're not doing that because I hate Facebook. I hate everything Zuckerberg has kind of done and stands for. Blah blah blah, whatever, who cares? But yeah, I mean, I'm not doing a Facebook for Popular Front, but on all those other platforms you can get hold of it. Music in this episode, the intro is by Home and the outro music is by an artist called Kill Miami. To stay fully updated with Popular Front, go to popularfront.co.